if you will.
No guardsmen were injured, and yet there were 13 students who were casualties. 4 were killed and 9 wounded. At the time of the shooting, we have documented evidence there were 16 people on the hill against 70 guardsmen with M1s and bayonets.
I can't recall any one incident that would have prompted and justified a volley of fire that I was aware of.
The shooting was far from an act of self-defense. It was an act of punishment and retribution directed at the students in the parking lot that harassed the guard when the guard were on the practice football field.
The assumption that there must have been due cause for American troops to shoot at unarmed demonstrators underlay much of the early reporting about the event, creating misconceptions that probably continue down to the present day, despite all evidence to the contrary.
And I've never seen anything like it in my life. The number of vicious rumors about students, ranging from the rumors about the 2 girls being pregnant, and that somehow justified, which was not true, and that somehow justified their death. Giving the finger, which every person who drives has experienced, and that justified their death. The number of incredible rumors, I was stunned. I didn't realize the human capacity to blame the victim.
It took me a day or so to get my wits about me because I was in a coma for a couple days. And the first thing that I read, first piece of mail that I read was a hate letter. It started out, "Dear communist SOB, I hope by the time you read this, you're dead." And it was like, whew, you know, that was pretty much an eye-opener as far as the reaction that the public had in relation to this event.
I had a lot of people that supported me in large part after it happened, and I also had death threats and hate mail sent to my address for months after it happened.
We got hate mail. We got, you know, death threats, bomb threats. You know, the Krauses got a huge blown up picture of their daughter saying "good riddance."
The general thought in this area and most of the state of Ohio was they should have shot more of those kids.
Suddenly we were perceived as a threat to the stability of the American system.
The FBI came to campus to investigate. The killings also prompted the federal government to form a commission headed by William Scranton, senator from Pennsylvania, to investigate nationwide campus unrest.
A report came out and said that the shootings were unnecessary, unwarranted, and inexcusable.
I guess I can't account for Scranton Commission's answers.
The FBI concluded that the National Guard fabricated, that they made up a self-defense theory after the events.
Immediately then, there was, of course, a call for a state grand jury investigation to determine what went on and if there should be criminal indictments returned. It was very obvious, I think, to everyone, given the intense polarization that existed between town and gown, that any local grand jury investigation was, in all likelihood, not going to find the guardsmen or their leaders responsible. Indeed, you know, it was frequently heard, well, it's too bad they only shot 4. They should have shot 40 or 400 or 4,000.
The shootings fell through the cracks of the criminal justice system. The state of Ohio declined to prosecute the Guard, which left it up to the federal government to try to do something. The only statutes that the federal government could try the Guardsmen on was violation of civil rights.
They returned indictments against 8 National Guardsmen. But in terms of the appropriate federal law, there was relatively little law upon which they could draw.
The federal government wasn't able to do anything. Statutorily, there was nothing that would apply to what the Guardsmen did, so subsequently no Guardsman was convicted of any wrongdoing for what happened.
The original one that was the federal trial, that the shooters were involved, to have that dismissed for lack of evidence, you know, obviously we're happy about that, because from my perspective, that was the right outcome. So.
Those indictments also were thrown out before any Guardsman could make it to the stand. And to know that they were thrown out because the judge believed that there wasn't sufficient evidence to prove a violation of civil rights is mind-boggling to me. I mean, here were unarmed college students protesting the invasion of Cambodia, putting our constitutional rights to their greatest test, and being shot down for it. If that's not a violation of civil rights, What is?
The killers have never spent one day in jail. So I really think that the Justice Department and the local courts and the state courts protected the killers in all of these incidents. And I really think it's an indictment of the American system of justice when you have clear examples of excessive force, where you have armed troops, whether it's National Guard or State Highway Patrol, firing into crowds of unarmed students on college campuses. And I really think there's no way you can justify that in a democracy.
In regard to the civil process, they were barred from this initially by something called the doctrine of sovereign immunity, which basically said the king is sovereign. It goes back that far. The government is sovereign and citizens cannot sue them. But the U.S. Supreme Court in 1974 handed down a decision called Schroyer v. Rhodes, in which they said that the doctrine of sovereign immunity is qualified, not absolute, and that civil suits in this type of case can occur. That opened the door then for the federal civil trial.
That lawsuit was in court from 1970 until 1979. We lost the 1975 trial at a jury by a 9-3 verdict because the judge and the jury were very biased. And to take the case to a jury a second time was a big gamble for our families. And so I think most of us realized after a very painful negotiating process that the out-of-court settlement, which involved perhaps $750,000 and also a statement of apology from the National Guard, I think that was really the best and most pragmatic, reasonable victory that we could have attained in the court at that time. Some people criticized us for taking a relatively small amount of money, but I think that we were never really in this case for the money, although we were concerned about some compensation for Dean Kaler, who's in a wheelchair. He got most of the money.
Civil court, the settlement, the whole thing, I was happy about it. I was satisfied. Basically, we weren't out for blood. We weren't out for millions of dollars, as it was continually reported. I kept saying that the civil lawsuit for $42 million, we weren't after that. All of us were fairly idealistic, and I think we still have some of that in us. We were out for the truth. We were out for making sure that people who were responsible for the shootings, who were responsible for setting that situation up, took some responsibility for it. And I think we got that. They said that they shot us. They shouldn't have shot us, and they were wrong for shooting us.
It was the first statement of regret or apology by any of the shooters. So we think that the out-of-court settlement was significant in that regard, and that's why we decided to do it, rather than gamble and go to a second jury.
The apology that the state and the National Guard gave was half-hearted.
If we believe what the firers said, that their lives were in danger, what were they apologizing for?
You can't place a monetary value on the loss of life that we endured that day, or Dean's loss of movement. He's paralyzed for life. You can't give him enough money to explain that away. And so I'm very dissatisfied, with the outcome of even that trial and that meager apology, which meant nothing.
As the proceedings of the civil suit continued through the late 1970s, the memory of May 4th was brought back to national awareness by a controversy that arose surrounding the construction of a gym annex near Blanket Hill, the site of the incident. A group opposed this construction on the grounds that it changed the appearance of a historical site.
When we learned that that site would be changed, we reacted very strongly to that. First of all, because we realized it was a very sacred site, because it's where we lost our friends and families lost their children. But we also believed it was a very important historical site that should be preserved, because an important event in history occurred there. And it was also an important piece of evidence because the civil trials were still looming, and a jury would ultimately have to be taken there, as other juries were, to view the scene of the crime.
I think the protest around the gym annex was clearly justified. I think the university was probably at its most insensitive in '77.
I believe that it really was a very bad decision. That annex could have been built many other places.
There were 7 original sites chosen for that gymnasium annex. Not one of them was the May 4th site.
Kent State's a wide open campus with many other open areas. They could have put that gym annex anywhere.
The gym never should have been built where it was built. It was an attempt by the university to obstruct the hill, to bulldoze the hill, and to think that if the hill was out of sight then it would be out of mind.
In June of 1977, activists organized a protest effort, and a tent city appeared near Blanket Hill in the middle of campus. Determined to block the bulldozers, the confrontation between protesters and the university went on for months.
The decision to put that gym annex where it is located invited 1 year's worth of protests, nearly 400 arrests. The parents of Sandy Scheuer, who was killed at Kent State, they were arrested. My mother and father were arrested. Members of the clergy, members of the faculty, numerous Kent State students, and students from all across America joined in those protests.
You know, it became a national media event that generated a great deal of support for saving the site.
Reminiscent of the protest days of the 60s, Tent City was an expression of outrage at the injustices associated with the May 4th incident. But eventually the construction proceeded, with the new building skirting the edge of the hill.
It reopened a lot of old wounds for the families of the dead students and for the wounded students.
And in fact, that gym annex now exists and covers up the spot where Jim Russell was shot in the forehead and in the thigh by the National Guard and one of the shotgun blasts.
Yeah, to me, it was purely a part on the governor's part to make the place look smaller than what it was, so that it will justify in some people's eyes, you know, that they were hemmed in there. In reality, it could be farthest from the truth.
We ultimately lost our efforts to save the May 4th site in Washington, because after meeting with representatives at the White House and the Department of Justice and the Department of the Interior, they ruled that a site cannot be named a National Historic Landmark unless it's at least 50 years old.
However it may have changed the nearby vicinity, Blanket Hill today remains quite recognizable as the site of the shootings, with its trademark pagoda and its abstract metal sculpture, marked by a perfectly circular hole where a bullet passed through on its trajectory towards the crowd of students at the base of the hill. The bullet hole was one of the few reminders of the shooting incident on campus for many years. For 2 decades, the only memorial to the slain students was a small headstone placed near the parking lot where the students were shot, with the names of the 4 deceased victims. But pressure for a more substantial memorial to the incident finally brought results in the late 1980s. Although scaled down from the original design, the Ast Memorial was begun in 1989 and completed on time for commemoration on the 20th anniversary of the shootings, May 4th, 1990. At the commemoration, speeches by former Senator George McGovern, Ohio Governor Richard Celeste, and others noted the significance of the memorial as a reminder to future generations that military force should not be condoned as a way to silence American citizens who publicly oppose government policy.
Surely exercising curiosity on a warm spring day, or even following the crowd, or even speaking your mind, or yes, even casting a stone, or hurling a curse, or making an obscene gesture. None of these youthful deeds deserved death or disability.
4 large marble slabs, like giant tombstones, sit near the crest of a wooded slope just behind Blanket Hill. The area is planted with daffodils, which bloom each May, coloring the hillside.
It's done in a tasteful enough way that when you go there, you know that something important happened here, and that you need to spend some time to inquire and learn and reflect. So,
I do like the memorial. I like the concept of inquire, learn, and reflect. I think it's very tastefully done.
And to the extent then that the memorial facilitates inquiry, learning, and reflection, the memorial's been an extraordinary success.
The May 4th Memorial, I think, remains as a bitter disappointment for those of us who are still concerned about this issue, and for those of us who are concerned about a proper tribute to the memories of those 4 students.
Well, the memorial is yet to be built.
thing I wish about the memorial is I'm hoping that students who come to this campus have more of an opportunity to learn about everything that's behind the memorial so that they can get a better sense of appreciation and understanding for it.
I think it's a great idea. There was something happened there that's part of our history, and it memorializes those students.
I personally find the memorial a rather peaceful place. I'm happy with it. I actually go there quite often and find myself in a rather reflective mode when I sit around the memorial.
The annual traditions associated with May 4th continue to this very day on the Kent State campus, overseen by the May 4th Task Force. On the evening of May 3rd, a candlelight march starts from Blanket Hill, winds its way across campus, and ends up back in the parking lot where the students were struck by bullets in 1970. There, the 4 spots where students were mortally wounded are marked by candles placed by the marchers, and an all-night candlelight vigil is held. The week of May 4th is marked by a variety of activities associated with the event, supervised by Kent State's Center for Peaceful Change. Speeches, discussions, rallies, and media presentations mark the anniversary of May 4th each year. What are the lessons to be learned from the shootings that took place in 1970?
The fundamental lesson about Kent State and our sister school in tragedy, Jackson State, is the abuse of power. That's what Kent State represented.
When you practice the politics of hatred, people are going to get hurt.
We hear of stories like that in South Africa, or in Latin America, or in the communist or fascist countries, but never in a democracy should we ever tolerate shooting into crowds, whether it's on a college campus or the streets of our cities.
The students had every right to protest. I mean, it's a right given to them by the Constitution through the Declaration of Independence. One of the ways I look at this event is to see it as part of a legacy of protest from the beginnings of the United States.
If we don't learn the right lessons from this, then we do not really have freedom of speech in this country.
I don't know that we learned a hell of a lot of lessons.
More than anything else, May 4th, 1970, I think, recognizes the incredible agony of this country over Vietnam.
May 4th, 1970 was the straw that broke the camel's back with respect to the war in Vietnam. That was the day when average Americans saw their own kids getting killed at home over a useless war and said, enough.
The actions of students across this country and the Kent State tragedy hastened the end of that war.
Arthur Krause himself, the father of Allison Krause, who was killed here at Kent State, Arthur told me on numerous occasions that his daughter may have been killed, but her death undoubtedly saved the lives of tens of thousands of American soldiers because the war in Vietnam came to a more hasty conclusion.
I think anybody who was on campus that day, and certainly anybody who was on the Commons and who witnessed the shootings, I think their life has changed dramatically.
Well, it's always an adjustment every day when you get up if you're a disabled person. You know, how I've dealt with it the last 25 years. I've grown and developed.
What I had always thought was part of the university environment seemed to have been obliterated on that very day. In other words, that this free exchange of ideas, the openness of expression was eliminated.
In dealing with the issues of being angry and being upset and dealing with the hostility that I had inside of me, I think I repressed some of it, but I also used other channels to get rid of that kind of energy.
I could identify the Krause family, the Schroeder family, the Shore family, and the Dean Kaler family. I can identify those people by sight. I've seen them so many times. And, you know, no amount of time will ever erase. I know what they must be going through, have been, and I can think that on any time that a birthday comes up or a holiday or near May 4th that those people have to suffer, and it just doesn't make sense.
Most people feel many years later that the real truth about Kent State, about what happened and why, has never come out.
I've always held out this hope that somebody in the National Guard will come forward some year and say, here's the story, here's what happened.
Young people can make a difference in the direction in which their country goes. They don't need to have advanced degrees or years of experience working to be able to get together, exercise their right to freedom of speech, and make their voices known about things that are going on in their country.
The system will work if we make it work. It's like what Thomas Jefferson once said, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. We have to constantly make sure that our political leaders respond to the will of the people and to keep America on the right course.
Accounts of exactly what happened on May 4th, 1970 at Kent State University still vary 25 years after the fact. Certain aspects of why the guard turned and fired remain unclear because those who fired have generally refused to talk about it. Opinions about who was to blame for the incident still differ, but the incident remains a recent reminder of how military force can be turned against unarmed demonstrators. To condone this overreaction sets a dangerous precedent that threatens our cherished freedoms of expression. The memorial to the slain students at Kent State stands as a reminder to future generations of Americans that this freedom is as fragile as it is precious.